Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss the plans that Rishi Sunak, Chancellor of the Exchequer, seems to be proposing in order to deal with the fairly sizable hole in the country's finances in a way that is generally designed to discourage certain behaviours and encourage other behaviours. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, this is an interesting one because I'm not opposed to taxes. I'm not someone, in fact, in this regard, I am in tune with much of the public. We're not as a nation opposed to taxes as long as we're getting value for money. If there's a good reason for taxation and they end up being used to fund much needed public services, I'm very happy with them. And I'm also happy with taxes being used to encourage certain behaviours that are in our interest and discourage behaviours that are not in our interest. To this end, we already have high taxation on alcohol and tobacco, and we have no tax at all on pension contributions and foods that are considered part of our staple diet. Although there are some oddities that you don't pay VAT on cakes, but you do on biscuits. Apart from anything else, this caused a hell of a row over Jaffa cakes some time ago because people don't understand the difference between a biscuit and a cake. But anyway, whatever. Now, the government, of course, certainly need to do something. I mean, even before COVID hit, and with an assumption that we would get a free trade deal with the EU, economists were saying that Boris Johnson's spending promises for the general election were unrealistic without raising taxes. They said, you're going to have to raise taxes to do this. Certainly not lowering them, as he was suggesting. Now, we have got the economic damage of COVID, which we're not expecting, which the government are now accepting is not going to be over anytime soon. They were going, we're in V-shaped recovery. Now it's like, it might be a bit of a W type thing going on that will take a couple of years. And the no-deal Brexit waiting to ambush us as well at the end of this year. So there is a hole the size of Johnson's arsehole in the country's finances. So increased taxation is absolutely going to have to be part of the solution to that. Got to be. Not that I'm saying that the Chancellor is planning to raise taxes exactly in line with my preferences there, but it has to be noted his behaviour so far has been to deal with these crises with socialist policies, so I have high hopes. They're not necessarily a million miles off what I would approve of, especially as one of them is a means to provide social care for the elderly. Now, this has been one of the most neglected areas of recent Conservative governments, and they have neglected almost everything important. But this is something that also hits their support base, because many middle-class Conservative voters who own their own homes, then, because of Conservative governments, they didn't have to do this under Labour, are forced to sell their homes to pay for their social care in their autumn years. Now, you'd have thought a Conservative government, which generally favours homeowners, property owners, would have at least done something in that regard. Perhaps it was because they didn't have to take their opposition seriously and they knew that these people would vote for them anyway. Maybe the fact that they now have got a serious opposition has prompted them into some sort of action. Because there is now a proposal to mimic a combination of the German and Japanese system of social care for the elderly. And I'm all for making international comparisons and learning from best practice. Now, this would take the form of contributions from over 40-year-olds. Now, I'm not an economist and I haven't read informed opinions on both sides, so I don't want to say too much, but to me, it makes sense because by applying contributions to the over 40s, which would include me, you're not putting too much pressure on people's finances when they're still young and making their way in the world, having to deal with the double whammy of getting housing organised when it'll be really expensive for them, whilst on relatively low wages. At the same time, if paying halfway through your working life is sufficient, then it makes absolute sense to me that it's something that starts at round about 40. Great. And by having these contributions linked directly to the social care that you will get in your elderly years, it should finally deal with the gaping hole in our society. Of course, there are an awful lot of others that the Conservatives will not touch with a barge pole, but credit where it's due, a good policy is a good policy. And if they do pursue this proposal, then like I say, unless I hear strong arguments to the contrary, which I have to keep an open mind about that, it would absolutely get my support. God dear. It's not every day I can support a government initiative, is it? Blimey. Then there's what is being termed a digital tax. So this is there's an awful lot of tax proposals coming out, of course. But, I'm focusing here on what might be considered reforms. And this is reform because it's a new tax, digital tax. This is basically a tax on online retailers to be analogous to business rates for shop-based retailers. Shops on the high street, for example. Now, this one I'm not as sure about because you could see both sides. Now, I'm not saying that I don't approve of it. I mean precisely what I say. I don't know. I don't know all of the benefits and I don't know all of the drawbacks, so I don't know where that balance is. Now, the thing about this particular tax is it has clearly arisen from lobbying by retailers on the high street. Now, generally speaking, I would say that government policies based on lobbying from groups who are acting out of their own financial interests are not generally the ones I think are best for the country. Lobbying in general is sort of okay, but when you're being steered by people who are lobbying you for their own financial interests, doesn't necessarily follow what's best for most of us. That being said, high street retail supports an awful lot of jobs and provides footfall for other businesses as well, which also provides for jobs in the area, in a way that online retail does not. And again, as with the social care proposal, I could be happy to accept that this one could also be justified in the context of balancing the economy and the need for jobs creation. But unlike with the social care example, for which I don't really see an obvious downside, I'd want to know what the money is going to be spent on. In addition, it is clearly a tax aimed at reducing the amount of online shopping that's done. Its direct effect is to raise the cost of buying anything online or even just having goods delivered. Now, like I've said, taxes for discouraging certain behaviours can be popular, depends on what they're for. So you get away, for example, with higher taxes on alcohol and tobacco because we know they're bad for us. The same applies to putting higher taxes on foods high in refined sugar and fat, we understand that, and besides their luxuries, we don't need crisps, we don't need fizzy drinks, we don't need cakes and things like that. So we can understand that. We know they're not good for us. We can understand paying more in taxes, especially if those taxes would go on medical care or campaigns to help educate people. Fine. But not everything that is bought online is necessarily a luxury as such, even though much of it may be. And it might be tough to explain to a population with shrinking budgets after 10 years of Tory government how it's in their interest to pay more to do their shopping. Because this costs them either way. This isn't... this is definitely discouraging online purchasers. It's not necessarily encouraging high street ones directly, because the situation would be as follows. If they continue to shop online, either because of the convenience or just because they're buying things they simply can't get on the high street. When I get things online, quite often it's just stuff I cannot get on the high street. Then those people are going to be paying more for it just because the government said they should, for no other reason. It's not because that product has suddenly cost more to produce. The government has just slapped an extra tax on it. On the other hand, if it does encourage them to shop on the high street, then that still costs them more, because they have to at least pay for transport, as well as taking more time out of their busy lives to do so. And the thing about taxes is that in this country, like I say, polls show time and again that we are very happy to pay taxes, even more taxes, if it will support public services. But Conservatives do have a habit of wasting a large proportion of our taxes on their rich mates. So, although we want the service and are supportive of moves to do what we think the government should be doing, namely strengthening those services and providing the conditions for jobs and wages growth, we do not pay a higher price for a poorer return with Conservative governments. Still, these represent two interesting tax proposals. I'm not immediately going to attack either of them. In fact, like I say, I can absolutely see my way to supporting the first, completely undecided on balance on the second. But it is possible that I could end up supporting it as well once I've seen informed arguments on both sides, because I haven't yet. In other words, they could both actually lead to improvements that will benefit us all. Now, at that point, I find myself wondering, so will it actually happen? Because at the moment, they are proposals. They're not going to be decided on until next year, next spring. I mean, I think they do have the enthusiastic consideration, at least, of Rishi Sunak. I think Matt Hancock is also in favour of the social care reform, though how much influence he's going to have in government when these matters are decided next spring is anyone's guess, because I still think he's the Cabinet's fall guy number one for COVID failings when the government are no longer able to shake criticism for their part in the disaster. So then you look at people who will oppose these moves, and of course there will be lobby groups set up to oppose them, absolutely. Will they be as strong as the lobby groups in favour of them? Will all these proposals melt away with the winter snow? Are we getting our hopes up at more of Boris Johnson's aspirational goals, only to see them disappear in the end, just like his garden bridge that never happened, his floating airport, our world-class test and trace programme, our free trade deal with the EU? Or will he actually see the imperative of, for once in his life, actually delivering on something? If he doesn't, perhaps the 100 or so MPs in very, very marginal constituencies will poke him into such action for fear of having their political careers cut short by a resurgent Labour Party. I guess time will tell, specifically a year's time will tell. But I do get so few opportunities to actually praise the government that, you know, you have to take your chances when you get them. Quickly, before they U-turn as well, on what little promising policies they even consider. So those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.